Brexit. Now, in order to explain that, we have to do just a little bit of history. Bear with me about what happened in England. First, just to make sure we're all on the same page. A year ago, the Prime Minister of England, at that time, David Cameron, he's still the Prime Minister, a conservative, been in power for a while, made a decision. He did not have to do this. It's not part of British law. He made a decision to have a referendum. That's what happened last week, that referendum. And the issue was, would Britain stay in the European Union as part of the European Union, or would Britain leave? British exit, Brexit is simply the two words put together. Right? So this is a political decision by a politician who thought it would help him. Okay, let's go backwards now. Why did he need help? What was he worried about? Well, Mr. Cameron's a conservative. So when the crisis hit in 2008, when modern capitalism went through its second spasmodic collapse, second worst after the Great Depression of the 1930s, the solution for Mr. Cameron was exactly the way it was here for Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama. First, bail out all the big banks and all the big corporations. Use public money to help them out. As soon as you'd gotten them over the catastrophe that they had caused by their poor investments, that's why the banks were in such trouble. They had lent money to people who couldn't pay it back. They had made investments that couldn't be recouped. They had really messed up big time. Having messed up, they turned to the government. The very institution they typically denounced, save us, they begged. And since the people in power are bankers on vacation from their job, you will be surprised to discover that the politicians, having removed their banker hats, were very welcoming to the bankers pleading with them. So they took public money, your money, my money, and bailed them out. How did they do this? Very wonderful. They borrowed the money. I can go through it with you if you want. It'll make you cry, but I'd rather not. I want to get to the Brexit. So they borrowed a lot of money in order to bail the bankers out. No sooner had they borrowed the money to bail the bankers out, given the bankers the money, bailed them out, then they said, oh my God, we have a deficit. We've borrowed all this money. That's terrible. We have to do something about the deficit. At that point, you know, a reasonable person with half a brain would have said, wait, stop. You think we have a terrible problem because you just borrowed the money to bail them out. If you hadn't borrowed the money to bail them out, there'd be no deficit. Or here's another thought. If you want to bail them out, why don't you tax the rich people, who they are, to get the money to bail them out? Why are you borrowing in a general way and then telling us there's a problem of deficit? But that's what everybody did. Mr. Cameron did it too. Now we have this big government deficit. We have to do something about it. What does that mean? We have to raise money to lower the deficit, to pay those bills back, to pay off the people who we borrowed from to bail out everybody. And how do you do that? You raise taxes on people, and you use money that you used to spend on schools and hospitals and roads, and you give it to the creditors so you can reduce your deficit. You squeeze the people. It's called an austerity policy. That's why it's called that, because it's very bad. Austerity isn't good. If you want something for Christmas, don't ask for austerity. Okay? Not good. It's squeezing people. And Mr. Cameron was a leader of squeezing people. He was the one who insisted that the Greeks should learn from us British to do that. Germans did the same thing. Okay, so Mr. Cameron squeezes. The real wage in Britain today is less than it was in 2003. That's a lost decade in which their wages went down. It's not just that it didn't go up nicely, but they went down. Britain was converted from a nation that had a large number of pretty good jobs to a nation that is now called what it is as no longer the proletariat, we are the precariat. Every job is insecure, like in the United States more and more. It's not so different. So Mr. Cameron was beginning to get pushback. The British people, the working class, were angry. They had been promised that wonderful things would happen. Not just by Mr. Cameron, but going back 30 years. The person who first promised them that if only they would let capitalists free to do what they wanted, wow, there would be great things. That leader, Margaret Thatcher. And her counterpart, Ronald Reagan. Same argument. That's why they liked each other so much. Either that or it was sex. Who knows? Who knows? It's true it wasn't Clinton, so maybe it wasn't. I don't know. The promises made by leftists, made by rightists, made by socialists, neoliberalism, deregulation, privatization, all these watchwords were going to create a wonderful era of prosperity and progress and growth, and it never happened. And when it never happened, that was bad. But when it collapsed in 2008, then it was beyond bad. But in that period from 2008 to now, the last 8 years, did something get learned by all of this? No. The governments kept pushing as if they had more to do of what it is that got us into all the trouble. By last year, the level of hostility in England, you could feel it. You could feel it every day, as you could more and more countries. Something had to give. And Mr. Cameron was a clever politician. He needed, that happens so often, to distract people, because he didn't want there to be this continuing rage about the real issues that were upsetting people. That they had no job, that they have no job future, that their children are accumulating debts to get a degree from college that is less useful for having a decent life than it's ever been in the and everything looked like it wasn't getting better anytime soon. And he didn't want that. He wanted a distraction. So did the British people. I don't want to put it all on him. This is getting scary. Our economic system is disintegrating. And indeed it is. And that's very scary for everybody. If you're not scared, it's either you're not paying attention or you're out of touch with yourself. You are. You are. And the most people are. And for good reason. So everybody, in a sense, wants a distraction. For some people, it's going and drinking too much and becoming hysterical at a soccer game. I saw that in Paris. Lots of working-class Irish guys coming over from the Channel to cheer their team against the Icelandic team, against the Turkish team, because it's all European in their thing. That's what some people do. Mr. Cameron had a good idea. Lots of British people don't like Europeans. They haven't for 10,000 years. They like to blame Europeans. If you go to England, you learn that the French people are faddists. They're not serious. And the Italians, wow. And the Irish, ooh. You get the picture? You get the picture. So the British, it's easy. Get the British to be angry at the Europeans, they already are. And over the last 10 years or so, as Eastern Europe fell apart after the end of the Soviet bloc there, large numbers of Polish, Czech, Slovenian, Slovakian, Bulgarian went to England to get jobs because they didn't have jobs where they were. So there was an influx of a whole new wave of European immigrants on top of the Asian and African immigrants that go to England anyway because of the Commonwealth and all of that. So it was easy to begin to talk about, hey, we got a problem here with Europe and the immigrants, and this was good stuff. Something that a conservative has used over and over again. So it was a clever idea. He distracted the British people who wanted to be distracted. And we got into a year of stay, leave, go to with the Europeans, go without the Europeans. Each side could say that if we stay with the Europeans, we will, to coin a phrase, be great again. And the other one said, no, if we leave Europe, we will be great again. Being great again, which is always this funny admission. You must not be too good right now. If you have to be great again, you have to get back. But it was a mammoth distraction. Why? Because it doesn't make much difference. The relationship between an average British person and his or her employer or his or her landlord is not going to be much affected by this. What is this all about? You know, it's as crazy as if you had a society suffering the same kinds of economic problems who suddenly got really excited about transgender toilets. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a distraction as bizarre as that? For those of you who don't know, 11 states, the governors of 11 states have a lawsuit against the federal government because the federal government mandates letting transgendered people go into whichever toilet they find attractive. That's what we're doing. Everybody wants to be distracted because it's scary. Why is it scary? Because it's real bad. It's very bad. There may not be a United Kingdom much longer. We're going to have to call it the disunited kingdom. Why? The Scottish people, they want to stay with Europe, overwhelmingly. And they're now thinking seriously, they were anyway, about seceding, leaving the United Kingdom in order to stay with Europe. Northern Ireland wants to stay with Europe, can't do that if they're part of England or Great Britain, but if they leave Great Britain and join with the old Irish Republic, which is in the EU, that's how they stay in. Ooh, what an interesting idea. There goes half the country. It'll now be England and Wales, which is a joke. The serious effect of all of this is not the detail of whether England is in or out. For those of you who know, there's a conversation going on. You know what the TTP is, that Trans-Pacific Partnership? Well, they have an equivalent for the Atlantic. And that's going to be negotiated now. Instead of by the European Union and America, it'll be the European Union, America, and Britain. And Britain will get its way. It'll get half of whatever it might lose from being out of the European Union by its negotiation here. This is a game. This is just a moment in an endless game. And this is the game of British capitalism trying to become wealthy and powerful, and to stay that way. London is the financial center for Europe. The reason within hours after the vote was announced that the leader of Germany, Angela Merkel, got up and said, this is irreversible, and you, Mr. Cameron, must not be under any illusion that this can be under... Huh? That's because Germany now has freedom. England was the second power of Europe after Germany. England is gone. Germany sits alone. They want the British out. They want the rest of Europe to be one big hinterland for the German economy. Mrs. Merkel is achieving, without war, what Mr. Hitler couldn't do with a war. Very serious stuff. Because that's the interesting consequence of all of this, not the details of in or out. During the campaign, each side in England said, you must vote for our side, because if you do, you'll be rich and famous, and if you don't, you'll be a poverty-stricken jerk. Each side made that claim with equal plausibility, that is to say, none. Because the consequences of what this is economically will take years to plan out, and will depend on 1,000 other variables we can't possibly know at this time. So these confident predictions, it will have this result, it will stop. It's not what it's about. This was a political ploy. It did what it was supposed to do. It distracted the British. Now that it's behind us, it's over, we'll be back to where we were. A Britain without a good job situation, now with new difficulties it's going to have a hard time dealing with political fallout from all of this. And the underlying cause, the mass of people becoming angrier and bitterer. Much of this vote had nothing to do with an argument about it's better for the future of the economy, all of which is nonsense anyway. It was the ability of the mass of the British people to give the finger to Mr. Cameron. And not just to Mr. Cameron, to Mr. Blair, the Cameron equivalent in the Labour Party before him. Yes, that's right. For them, it's an important moment. It's an important moment to say, we're angry, we're bitter. All kinds of people in this country who call themselves religious fundamentalists have been supporting Donald Trump, a man who trades in his wife every few years to get a new one, which is not the consistent notion of a fundamentalist religious perspective. Why are they able and willing to make this adjustment? Because they're very angry about a lot of things, and the old candidates look to be what they were, mouthing platitudes, not believable, not trustworthy, and on the right wing, they went for Trump because it was a way of giving the finger at the establishment. And an awful lot of the supporters of Sanders, not to take away from him in any way, are doing the same thing on the other side. They don't like Clinton, not because of her or this, but because she's part of that which was. The people held accountable. And people don't want this. And do they know what they want? No. Is the vote for Brexit a clear desire to do this or that? No, of course. They don't know what to do. They've been led for decades now by two political parties. In England, the Conservative and the Labour. In this country, Republican and Democrat. In France, the Conservative and the Socialist. And they've become indistinguishable, almost. A little bit harsher on the Conservative, a little bit sweeter on the... But they're all supporters of the status quo. And it's the status quo which is slowly becoming clear in people's mind is what the problem is. So they're as disgusted with the left wing who maintains the status quo as they are with the right wing who maintain the status quo or slightly varying forms of it. And if this analysis is correct, then there will be twice the anger building now as people realize they just had a year of shadowboxing. The things have gotten worse, not better. And what was this all for? Are you going to be better off under Brexit than you would have been if you'd stayed in the EU? Don't be silly. The EU is now run by people whose point of view is not very different from Mr. Cameron's. What do you think is going to happen? What is going to happen? There is no change built in. The people who run these societies have no idea how to change it. Their basic policy is more of the same. Mrs. Clinton's policy for the United States is more of the same. That's why she and Obama can work together. It's all the same. That's what they offer. And that's what they offer in England too. And it doesn't matter whether it's in or out of Europe, it's the same. You know who's going to negotiate the details of Brexit? Who are going to work out with the Europeans what's going to happen now? The same people. Mr. Cameron resigned as of October. Oh, normally when a politician is told by his people, get out, he resigns as of, tomorrow morning. He resigned as of, October. And he's already named the team of his advisors to work with the European Union on the detail. I mean, this is a joke. This is a society, and look, it's not so different from all of us as people. We face very difficult moments in our lives. It's hard to face them, right? We all look back later and say, how could I have not seen this problem in this relationship I had, or that, and our friends try to help us. He doesn't like you. And it's hard. And we don't want to see it, and even when we do finally see it, we kind of, because we don't know what to do with this information. And it's very scary to break it off. Well, then I'll be lonely again. And that wasn't so good either. All of these, that happens on a national basis as well. If I could be so bold and to push it, I think that capitalism, and I haven't said this, I don't think, to you before, it's so bad now that I'm beginning to wonder whether it's over. And that what we are experiencing are the early phases of this very painful coming to face what it means that this can't work anymore, that it is producing such bizarre behavior, such conflict, such tensions, such breakings apart of our institutions, that we have to come up with new directions of social development, because what we have is dragging us down. And we don't kind of want to go with it. It's just an economic system. It's just a political system. It can be changed. This one we have was created by other people. We can change this sort of thing, but you have to be ready to do it, and you have to be convinced that not doing it is even scarier than that plunging a little bit into the unknown, which all change involves. Otherwise, how do you explain the similarity? The going off the rails in one way to Trump, in another way to Sanders. People doing things and getting support of millions of people that nobody foresaw as little as 6, 8, 12 months ago. The Brexit passing when it was guaranteed it could never happen. It happened. The spectacle in France of a socialist government using the police of the country to beat up on the very people who voted them into office. I mean, what? What? And on and on and on. Yesterday, Mr. Schäuble, the finance minister in Germany, who works with Angela Merkel, gave a lecture to the government of Portugal. The government of Portugal, by the way, I think I've mentioned it to you, the government of Portugal is a coalition. It is the Socialist Party, and it is the Communist Party, and it is the Green Party. For some of you, this is an occasion for dancing. That's the government of Portugal now. If, by the way, you weren't aware of that, I won't embarrass you by asking you if you weren't aware of it. But if you weren't aware of it, that may have something to do with the media here in the United States. Anyway, the Portuguese government is pledged to be anti-austerity. It's planned to reverse all of that, to have more public school teachers and to build the roads and to give people jobs. That's what they were elected for. And they're planning now to do it. And Mr. Schäuble, the finance minister of another country, told them they mustn't. Whoa. And the Portuguese government, to their credit, said publicly, go, and then the word starts with the letter F. They didn't use that word, but it was unmistakable, the spirit in which they respond. And he, by the way, he withdrew. But it was a moment that revealed a lot. That's what they're doing. We're running this game. British are out, and you're going to do this, and we're going to take care of you in Greece, and we're going to take care of you in Portugal, and you're going to behave the way we want to. And all industry will be based here in Germany. France will have nice restaurants. And the rest of Europe will be shaped around a new center. This is a very deep set of adjustments. We're going to have to live with the consequences of whatever this peculiar election we're about to go into means for us. We haven't begun to process it all. Capitalism is a system that is in very serious difficulty. Things now are done only to make money. That's what the profit-driven capitalism is about. That's what governs the decisions of what gets invested and what doesn't, and where the investment is made and how it's made. And we're now living with the consequences of a system that works this way and that has been very successful in getting the people and the government to leave them largely alone. And we're living with the results. And those results are tearing the societies apart. The gap between rich and poor, the gap between the powerful and the powerless, within every country, among countries. The Portuguese were not pleased to have the finance minister of Germany tell them what they can and cannot do. And that this plays itself out in a culture and in a society in profound ways. The military exercises that are being undertaken by NATO all along the border with Russia, these are very serious maneuvers that you wonder what in the world is why now? Why this? What boxes have people wangled their way into? The importance of Brexit is for all of us to understand what Mr. Cameron didn't figure out until it was too late. That the anger and rage of the mass of people is way worse than what you thought it was. That it's going to come back and bite you on the rear end when you don't want it, when you didn't expect it, and had no plan for how to handle it. And since nothing is being changed to deal with this problem, it's just going to build again out of the very frustration that Brexit didn't change anything, and voting for or against Mr. Trump isn't going to make any difference either. That is, no difference to the underlying problems that produced Mr. Trump or produced Brexit in the first place. For that, you have to be willing to look at systemic change. That's always hard, but it's beginning to happen. And if I could end where I began, we ask ourselves in Democracy at Work, how were we able to get on 60 radio stations in the United States? Why are 60 radio stations broadcasting the kind of thing I'm talking with you about this evening? Because that's what I do. In fact, you'll see a particularly tight overlap. For those of you that listen to the WBAI program that will be tomorrow, will see the overlap with what I've done here tonight. Because the audience wants it. And that's itself very important information. Someone like me didn't get on the radio until recently. And someone like me sure didn't get on 60 stations every week. That's about an audience that wants something, that needs something. Of course, the best possible news for folks like us, because we really have an audience now. But that tells you something about a society undergoing very fast and profound changes. I've quoted this before, but I want to end with it again. A great political leader, one of the greatest, was asked why it takes so long for people to understand the dilemmas they're in and to begin to act to change it. And his answer went like this: for decades, nothing happens. And then, in a few weeks, decades happen. It's an illusion. The pressure is building. We just saw moments of the pressure escape. That's what the Brexit vote is. That's what the Trump is. That's what Sanders is. We're seeing the bits emerge, and the question is, do we have the courage to see both the potential and the signs of danger that are all wrapped up in this? It's very, very urgent. And I come back from Europe telling you that the people I saw over there are acutely aware of things being very strange and unusual and going in directions they did not foresee, both on the left and on the right. There is finally a kind of contour of a new politics emerging. It's just fuzzy still, so I can only sketch it for you. But the old middle, what in Europe is called center-left and center-right, which used to dominate, the two parties getting 3/4 or more of the vote, that's all collapsing. They can't do it anymore. What's emerging on the other is a left wing and a right wing. The two-party arrangement is giving way to a three-party arrangement. 1/3 left, 1/3 right, and 1/3 the old middle. That's all the old middle can still hold. And what's emerging particularly is that if you look at the extremes, that's where all the young people are. And that's another sign of where things are going. If you're in that middle third and you take a look at the demographics of your group, you're in trouble. Clinton knows that. George Bush knows it. They all know it. They don't know what to do, but they all know it. So I can see from your faces that this is a bit somber as an ending. I don't mean it to be somber. On the other hand, it is what it is, as they say, and it's not my job to make it pretty. You all know that the way to do that is just to turn on the television and listen to the news, and then you will not be troubled by any of these things at all, and you can go back and enjoy whatever it is you drink. But for those of you that are, which is what the hope here is, for those of you that might be inspired to do something about all this, to begin to intervene in this process so it goes in this direction rather than that one, then if I can make a few of you do that, or at least help you in that direction, then I'll feel very justified in the time and effort that we spend to produce these evenings, because that's really what's needed, is that for folks like you to begin to get active.